Television remembers her as Ethel Mertz, but Vivian Vance was so much more before that role defined and confined her life. Born Vivian Roberta Jones in Cherryvale, Kansas, she wasn't the kind of small-town girl content with the ordinary. She was sharp, restless, and hungry for something bigger. By the time she reached her 20s, the stage had become her home. Broadway knew her name long before Desilu Studios ever rolled a camera. She performed in musicals like Music in the Air and Let's Face It, carving out a reputation as a glamorous, witty actress who could command the spotlight with elegance and bite. This is the first irony of her story. She wasn't discovered as a comedian, and certainly not as a sidekick. She was a legitimate actress, a woman of presence. On Broadway, she could shine in silk gowns and glittering sets. But Hollywood has a way of reshaping people into what it thinks America wants. In 1951, Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz were building something unprecedented, a family sitcom that would forever change television. They needed a married couple to balance Lucy and Ricky Ricardo. Enter William Frawley, an aging vaudevillian with decades of grit on his face, cast as Fred Mertz. And then came the search for Ethel, Fred's wife, Lucy's partner in crime. The other half, who would never overshadow the star. Vivian Vance's Broadway resume impressed Lucy immediately. She had the timing, the poise, the ability to ground Lucy's chaos in believable rhythm. She was hired. On paper, it was the role of a lifetime. Steady work in a pioneering sitcom. But in reality, it was the role that would trap her. Because built into the DNA of Ethel Mertz was a humiliating truth. Vivian Vance would never be allowed to look glamorous again. From the moment she signed on, her image was no longer her own. Costumers were told to keep her plain. Executives whispered that she needed to look dowdier to make the marriage to William Frawley believable. A cruel subtext lingered. She was too attractive, too youthful, too vibrant, so they had to sand all that away. Vivian accepted the paycheck. She accepted the laughs. But inside, the woman who once glided across Broadway stages in gowns bristled at the thought that America would only ever see her as frumpy Ethel. Audiences loved Ethel Mertz. She was the down-to-earth foil to Lucy's manic schemes. The woman who rolled her eyes and then inevitably got dragged into the chaos. But for Vivian, every laugh came with a cost. Behind the camera, she was forced into matronly clothes that aged her by a decade. Rumors swirled that Desi Arnaz himself insisted she appear heavier, so the marriage to William Frawley's Fred Mertz didn't look absurd. Imagine the sting of being told you had to look worse for the sake of believability. It wasn't enough to act. Your body, your appearance, even your dignity were part of the contract. The rage-bait truth is this. Hollywood in the 1950s rewarded Lucille Ball's glamour and punished Vivian Vance's. Lucy could play glamorous or goofy, adored either way. Vivian had to be the sidekick, the punchline, the cautionary tale of what happened when beauty aged. Audiences roared with laughter, never knowing how much of it came at Vivian's expense. The jokes about Ethel's looks were constant. She was too plain, too nosy, too middle-aged. And for a woman in her early 40s who still had fire in her, it was suffocating. Vivian once admitted privately that the role made her feel older than she was, as if her youth and vibrancy had been stolen for the sake of someone else's punchline. And yet here lies the paradox. Ethel Mertz made her famous. Without Ethel, Vivian might have been forgotten. With Ethel, she was immortal, but in chains. Every great sitcom needs a straight man, the one who grounds the chaos. But unlike Desi Arnaz's Ricky, who could still be handsome and commanding while scolding Lucy, Vivian's Ethel was stripped of glamour altogether. It wasn't fair, and she knew it. She carried the bitterness quietly, because what could she do? In the golden age of television, there was no walking away. You either played the role or disappeared. So she played it. She played it brilliantly, but inside, Vivian Vance despised Ethel Mertz. And in later years, she admitted it. She hated the way the role boxed her in. She hated the way audiences only ever saw her as Lucy's frumpy friend. And she hated that America's laughter was built in part on her humiliation. If the wardrobe, the weight jokes, and the frumpy image were humiliating, then her on-screen marriage was the salt rubbed deep into the wound. William Frawley, the man cast as Fred Mertz, was everything Vivian Vance did not want in a partner. He was 22 years older than her, visibly weathered, gruff in demeanor, and carried with him the reputation of a hard-drinking, sharp-tongued vaudevillian who had seen better days. Vivian had worked her way through Broadway, where stage partners were chosen with chemistry, elegance, and balance in mind. To her, being paired with Frawley wasn't just an odd casting choice. It was an outright insult. She was still in her 40s, attractive, witty, and vital. Being forced to play wife to a man old enough to be her father felt less like acting and more like Hollywood's cruel way of telling her what she was worth. A character actress, never a leading lady. From the very beginning, she resented the decision, and unlike many actresses of her era, who kept quiet to preserve their careers, Vivian didn't hide her feelings. Frawley picked up on the disdain instantly. He was not the type to let an insult slide. He gave back what he got, and their feud was born. Crew members whispered about the frost between them. It wasn't subtle. On set, if one entered a room, the other would roll their eyes. Between takes, their exchanges could be sharp enough to cut. Vivian reportedly told friends that being Frawley's screen wife was the most humiliating assignment she had ever endured. He retaliated by mocking her weight, her attitude, even her ambitions. Their mutual contempt became part of the studio folklore. And yet, when the cameras rolled, the bitterness transformed into magic. Fred and Ethel Mertz bickered, nagged, and squabbled like a real married couple. Their chemistry was undeniable, precisely because it was laced with authentic irritation. Audiences roared with laughter, not realizing they were watching a feud smuggled into comedy. What tortured Vivian off-screen became television gold on-screen. The irony is brutal. Their misery was America's entertainment. What viewers adored was, for Vivian, a cage she could never break out of. The feud was so intense that when CBS executives floated the idea of a Fred and Ethel spin-off, it collapsed almost immediately. The chemistry might have sold tickets, but Vivian made it crystal clear she would never spend another project chained to William Frawley. She wanted her career back, her dignity back, and Frawley represented everything she wanted to escape. Without her, the concept died on the spot. Years later, when people asked Vivian about her husband, she didn't mince words. She barely spoke of him at all. Her silence was louder than any insult she could have hurled. The loathing never softened, not even with time. Here's what makes this chapter so raw. To millions, Fred and Ethel were lovable, hilarious, unforgettable. For Vivian, Fred and Ethel were her prison bars, playing the wife of a man she despised, playing it so convincingly that audiences adored it, cemented her place in history, and locked her into a misery she could never quite shake. Amid all the tension, bitterness, and professional humiliation, there was one bright spot in Vivian Vance's Hollywood story: Lucille Ball. Their friendship was as complicated as it was genuine, and in many ways, it became the most important relationship of Vivian's career. From the beginning, Lucy recognized Vivian's brilliance. Where executives saw a replaceable supporting actress, Lucy saw the partner she needed. She knew instinctively that the slapstick chaos of I Love Lucy would collapse without someone to ground it. Vivian gave Lucy's antics weight and rhythm. Without Ethel Mertz, Lucy Ricardo would have been a cartoon. With Ethel, she was human, and Lucy never forgot it. When studio executives grumbled about contracts or whispered about finding a cheaper actress, Lucy fought for Vivian. She reminded them that audiences loved the pair, not just the star. That loyalty mattered. For Vivian, it was proof that even in a system that demeaned her, at least Lucy valued her worth. Off-screen, their friendship blossomed into something much more personal. They dined together, they traveled together, they leaned on each other in the hardest moments of their private lives. When Vivian's marriages fell apart, Lucy was the friend who poured her a drink and listened. When Lucy's own marriage to Desi Arnaz unraveled, it was Vivian who offered steady comfort. Hollywood can be brutally lonely, but in Lucy, Vivian found the rare thing that fame rarely allows: a confidante who understood. And yet even that closeness had limits. No amount of dinners, phone calls, or shared tears could erase the imbalance between them. Lucy was the star, the empire, the mogul. Vivian was the support act. The show's very structure kept that hierarchy alive. Lucy could slip from glamour to ridiculousness in a heartbeat, adored all the same. Vivian, meanwhile, was trapped in the role of the sensible, plain neighbor. The unspoken rule was always there. Lucy shined, Vivian steadied. Lucy soared, Vivian stayed grounded. When I Love Lucy ended, Vivian tried to reclaim herself. She returned to the stage. She pursued guest roles, but the shadow of Ethel was too heavy. Casting directors couldn't see her as anything else. Audiences wouldn't allow it. Even when she reunited with Lucy on The Lucy Show, and Here's Lucy, it was as Ethel once more, a ghost she could never escape. This was the cruel cage of typecasting, beloved yet trapped, remembered yet erased. For all her skill and charisma, Vivian Vance's name never soared on its own. She was Lucy's friend, Lucy's neighbor, Lucy's shadow, and in that shadow, even her brightest light was dimmed. By the 1970s, Vivian Vance's body began to betray her. The sparkle that once carried her across Broadway stages dimmed under the weight of depression and illness. Years of professional disappointment had worn her down. The glamorous woman who had once dreamed of leading roles now carried the scars of typecasting, and her health reflected it. And yet, even as her strength waned, Vivian never fully walked away from the screen or from Lucy. When Lucille Ball called, Vivian answered. She returned for appearances on The Lucy Show and Here's Lucy, reprising Ethel one more time for an adoring audience that still laughed at the very things she resented. To some, it looked like loyalty to a character. In truth, it was loyalty to a friend. Her bond with Lucy was unshakable, something deeper than scripts or contracts could dictate. But in those later years, Vivian finally allowed herself to speak plainly. The mask slipped. She confessed the truth she had hidden for decades. She hated Ethel. She hated the frumpy costumes that aged her by a decade. She hated the weight jokes that chipped away at her dignity. She hated the forced pairing with William Frawley, which she had always viewed as humiliating. Most of all, she hated how the role erased her glamour, her vitality, and the chance to ever be seen as anything else. For most of her career, she had swallowed the bitterness. She smiled for the cameras, signed autographs, played the good sport. She let America have its Ethel. But as she approached the end, Vivian wanted clarity. She wanted the world to know that she was not Ethel Mertz. She was Vivian Vance, a Broadway actress, a witty and stylish woman, a performer whose range had been sacrificed to make another star shine brighter. In 1979, cancer claimed her life at just 70 years old. She passed away in California, far from the Kansas town where her journey began. At her side, heartbroken, was Lucille Ball. Lucy wept uncontrollably. Later, she would say that losing Vivian was like losing part of herself. For Lucy, there was no hierarchy in that moment. No star, no sidekick, no shadows. There were just two women who had shared a bond no one else could ever understand. And here is the cruel, unforgettable irony of Vivian's story. The role she despised, the one that humiliated her, the one that stripped her of glamour, is the very role that made her immortal. Generations who don't even know her name still laugh at Ethel Mertz. The cage became the crown. So here is the truth Vivian Vance left us with. Fame is not always freedom. Sometimes it is a prison disguised with applause. Sometimes the laughter of millions comes at the cost of one woman's dignity. When you rewatch I Love Lucy, don't just watch Lucy's antics. Watch Vivian. Watch her eyes. See how much she gives, how much she restrains, how much she sacrifices in every single scene. That is the real Vivian Vance. That is the woman who deserves to be remembered. And the next time you laugh at Ethel's lines, remember the truth. Behind that laughter was a woman who was brilliant, glamorous, wounded, and infinitely more than just Lucy's sidekick.